Welcome to the lABLEd podcast, a show about disability, illness and difference. I'm Lucy.
And I'm Alice.
And that's Lola.
Kaleidoscope identity, and this is who I'm meant to be. I'm just labelled me. I'm just labelled me.
Hi guys! Don't forget, in this episode, I might swear, Lucy might cry, and you can check out details of the trigger warnings on our website.
Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new episode of the lABLEd podcast. My name is Lucy and I am here with Alice today. Hello Alice!
I like that you say Alice today, like it's not usually me. Like it's not always us. Yeah.
I've decided to talk to Alice today.
Or is it that I've bothered to turn up?
Well, either or.
I'm all right.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you, Liz?
Good. I'm all right, thank you. Not too bad. I've said before in previous episodes, life is getting back to normal. I'm busy again, and I'm not sure I like it. Thank you very much. It's actually like a lie-in, but there we go.
I did hear a thing on the news recently where they're sort of saying something like 50% of businesses are saying that they're not expecting all of their workers to start going back into the office, like when the world opens up again. So I think there is going to be an element of a new normal. Things are going to be different. I work from home anyway, so
yeah, me too.
It makes bugger all difference to me.
I quite like being able to come downstairs and just roll to the kitchen table and there is everything, you know, rather than having to wait for security to let me in. Well, security to let me in, meaning two bulldogs sat at the bottom of the stairs.
You have to give them the special password of biscuits before you can go past.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Luce, do you want to introduce our guest for today?
Yeah, so our guest for this week's episode is Dr. Paul Darke. I know me and Paul go way, way back because, as I was saying to Alice before we started recording this episode, when I was at university, I was writing a dissertation on disability representation in the media. Very on brand for me. Got myself in a right old flap because I thought, I don't know what I'm doing, and managed to find Paul's details on the internet, got in touch with him, and we've been friends ever since. He sent me a load of resources and stuff and helped me write my dissertation. So thank you very much, Paul. He's been a great supporter of mine from the get-go, and he's very kindly agreed to join us on our podcast today. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's always been a pleasure to support you.
Fabulous. Oh, it's lovely to see you, Paul. So Paul, do you want to tell the listeners a bit about yourself, please?
A bit about myself. Well, I suppose there's quite a lot I could talk about, but I think, I'm nearly 60, so that's the first thing, which just explains all the grey beard. And I know no one can see this, but there's an awful lot of grey there.
There's distinguishedness to your voice, Paul.
Absolutely. Well, that's very nice of you to say. So, but I have spina bifida identities. I'm a wheelchair user. I'm originally from Surrey, although I now live in Wolverhampton, and I went to a couple of special boarding schools. In fact, my first boarding school was solely for people with spina bifida,
wow.
Which is
specialist.
That is specialist. It doesn't exist anymore for whatever reason. We can talk about that a bit later. And then after that, I went to a local comprehensive for 1 year, which utterly did my head in. Because having been in a special mollycoddling sort of school where I had no qualifications, I left with no qualifications. I think we were just being warehoused till we died. Because, spina bifida, the general conception was you would die by the age of about 15. So that's what my parents expected. So I've lived a little bit longer than most people expected. And so then I went to this comprehensive, which was completely inaccessible. Maths was on the top of the fourth floor. I used to walk a bit on crutches, and it was an absolute nightmare. And I always say I couldn't wait to give up crutches because walking on crutches, I felt like a cripple. In a wheelchair, I just looked like one. So
Fine balance,
so,
isn't there, really?
so I couldn't wait to give up walking, and it was one of the joys of life, because it was also a punishment at my special schools. We had cushions pinned to our bums to protect our posteriors, and we were forced to go on crutches. And if we were caught in a wheelchair, because we all tried to slip, you'd get punished by being sent to bed early. And it was a religious school as well. It was.
I know you said you're a little bit older, Paul, but it sounds like you went to school in the 1840s.
It was well. The irony is, it cost the local authority more to send me there than it would have done to send me to Eton, which
Jesus.
And so it was a unique experience again. But actually, and that's one of the ironies of life. I'm against segregated schools. I'm against kind of marginalising disabled children. But and again, I'm quite glad I went there, because I grew up with 4 brothers, and I think if I'd have gone to the local comprehensive like they had, we were a very poor working class family, even in Surrey, lived on a big council estate. They all failed at school. I would have failed at school, probably ended up in a fairly menial job. But actually, not having an education enabled you to think for yourself and to survive and thrive in a way. So I used to come home for the summer holidays, and my brothers were 4 boys, much older than me, very aggressive. I remember one of my brothers trying to stab me, and I had to jump out the front window once.
God.
And they did that quite a lot to one another. We were quite an aggressive, because there's 5 boys, and so. But actually,
there's like roughhousing and play fighting, and the casual, oh, my brother tried to stab me, I had to throw myself out a window. I'm not sure that's just kind of casual boys being boys, Paul, I'll be honest.
The worst my sister's ever done, and continues to occasionally do, is she'll let me chase her around the house and then go and sit halfway up the stairs so I can't get at her, which is both genius and a bit mean, to be honest.
Is Sophie older or younger than you?
Younger, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's it. That's it. I'm the oldest, and so I am constantly. I'm kind of used to having that slightly sort of.
You're the bully. You're the bully.
No, and I'm used to having the crafty younger sibling who takes complete advantage of you, and and I always think, we're the pancake children. We're the first ones to throw away. Whereas my brother, who I don't think listens, but his missus listens, definitely has done very well for himself, if he does say so himself.
Okay, yeah.
It builds character, though. It builds character when you've got siblings doing that to you. So, for example, a lot of the other people I went to school with, who were often only children, they gave up living pretty much very quickly. Ended up in institutions. They couldn't face the rough and tumble of life to some extent. So, I am eternally grateful to my brothers for persecuting me.
For trying to stab you.
Because it does. It makes you think for yourself, do stuff for yourself, and want to get out of it.
I was going to say, you've got to be sort of, excuse the phrase, quick on your feet, haven't you? If you're in constant fear of being stabbed.
Yeah.
But we used to play sport together, and again, the other thing about going to a special school like that, we played sports. If I'd have gone to Cambridge, and I like sport, so if I'd have gone to Cambridge, I never would have played sport. But as a group of disabled people with spina bifida, we had a football team with people on crutches, always 2 wheelchairs in goal, and we played normal schools, in quotes.
Yeah.
And these normal kids, this is like from when we were 12, 13, 14, and these middle school children would come up to play us, not knowing what they were expecting. And you could see the terror on their faces of being confronted by these people. And we used to have steel crutches in them.
Oh, my God.
You sound like a mafia boss, Paul.
Oh, like a supervillain.
Well, it gets worse, because the second special school I went to, which was Trelaws, which is quite famous, and it was all boys at the time, and that was really violent. That was an incredibly violent school, and I remember, and that was multiple impairment. mixed boys, and the primary group were haemophiliacs, and the haemophiliacs hated the congenitals, and the congenitals hated the haemophiliacs.
Oh my God, it's like gang warfare.
But the haemophiliacs used to beat the living shit out of one another and put each other in hospital, because if you punch haemophiliac, and it was just dreadful. But then we used to do that as well. I remember having a fight with Tom Morton, his name was, and he had no arms and no legs as the lABLEd. And I was sitting there kneeing him in the head primarily because he's trying to bite me, because that's all he could do. And he had one hell of a bite.
Alice, I tell you, disabled people can be really horrible to one another. It's a common myth that we all get on.
I hated the second one because, and again, it had a higher academic level as well. Yeah. Because it had a history of academia, and I'd not done that. So I focused on the sport, and that's where I got fat. Well, that was the boys. It was run like a public school, so there were prefects. And, I beat the prefect in our dorm once at table tennis, and I had to clean toilets for a week, because he didn't like the fact that I'd beaten him, and it was a very strange place. But the problem was, and that was the beginning of, I had a bit of a breakdown then because of the academic stuff, and it was so violent compared to my first school, which was very nice, and we were sort of left in a corner. And I started eating there, so that's where I first got fat. But I made some of my best friends. A guy called Adam Bowley, he's dead now, and he was one of my best friends. And we used to sneak off at lunchtime and buy sausage rolls, cherry aid, and matches, and go in the woods and burn stuff.
Paul, I would quite happily join you for cherry aid and sausage rolls, but you can buy the matches yourself. That's down to you. You do the matches. I'll have the sausage roll and the cherry aid.
It was, but those bits were fun. But it was, and then I went to the comprehensive, and that was an absolute nightmare, because everybody had grown up knowing one another through the local schools. I knew no one. It's funny, I still got one friend who I still speak to from there as well, and but the irony is my only O level, and it is literally my only O level from that era, was before opening time, because I was 17. I had my mobility allowance, and so I used to go in, register. The first class was government and politics, and then I would go to the pub, get pissed, and go home and sleep.
Nice one.
This is not when Lucy said to me, "Oh, I think we should get Dr. Paul Darke on."
You thought it was going to be serious.
I didn't think this is what we'd be talking about today. I think we're going to have to put a trigger warning up the top of this: extreme child-on-child violence.
You can see why we get on, can't we? Can't you really? I went to a school that was for people with disabilities, and I think, Paul, looking back, I do kind of wish that I could have gone to a mainstream school, especially to do my exams. And I think at the time when I was doing my exams, it was all about the inclusion thing was at the forefront of people's minds. And I remember being told by a teacher that I was a prime candidate to go to a mainstream school, but me being a stalky teenager went, I don't want to leave, all my mates are here. Looking back now, I wish that the 30-something-year-old me could have gone, think about this, Lucy. Will you think about this, please? And, just because your mates are here, just go and, get some proper qualification. Because actually, when I lost my job a few years ago, I was going through my CV, and I was going through all my qualifications, and the amount of qualifications that aren't worth the paper they're written on, like, it means nothing to nobody that I can cross the road adequately using a pedestrian crossing and things like that. Well, like, that is no use to anybody. And if I'd have gone to a mainstream setting, all right, would have been a bit awkward, but I would have probably had a lot more. I'm not saying that my education at the school I went to was bad, but I think I would have got a lot more out of it if I'd have gone, do you know what, I will go and do my GCSEs.
You see,
somewhere else, please.
I went to a mainstream school, and you know,
and look at you now.
Well,
you've got your own podcast and everything.
You could take that as being good or bad, as entirely up to you.
It's and one of the things I think. So I went to a mainstream school, but then more recently I have done some volunteering at a quote unquote special school for kids with learning difficulties primarily, but obviously there's kids there with lots of really complex and multiple needs. And that school is amazing. It is, there's 12 kids to a class and 5 adults in each classroom. So there's there's like a teacher, and then there's classroom assistants. It's all on the ground floor. Everything's accessible. It's just, it is a thing of beauty. And I think the level of engagement that those kids are getting means that whatever you're teaching them is going to be delivered, and they're going to be consuming it in such an just better, just well.
Yeah.
Whereas I went to an inner city London girls' school where I think there were 32 girls in my class, and I did not, inclusion was not at the forefront of everybody's mind. When I did one of my science GCSEs, I got extra time. They would take the exam paper on the morning that it arrived from the examining board, and they would take it to a photocopier and they would blow it up onto an A3 piece of paper. That was my enlarged exam paper.
What's Alice doing? She's taking an exam on a map.
And so, but of course, because all they were doing was basically blowing it up, it meant that, like, my science exams, the images were all a little bit blurry, and it's like, I'm already struggling to see this. And the one I particularly remember was a biology exam where they didn't have anywhere quiet to put. It was such a full school. We were, this was the early 2000s, and we were in a building that was built in, I think, 1888, and so there was nowhere to put me. So they stuck me in the sixth form common room and went, nobody talk to her, she's doing an exam. And within about 4 minutes, I had 3 really cool because it was a girls' school until you got to sixth form. So I had 3 really nice 17, 18-year-old boys sitting down going, that's what this cell is, and that's what this is. And I was like, thank you very much. But not the most supportive. Had I been in a more specialist school, I think I could have answered those questions without them. But
yeah. I mean, I think going to a special school for me, I mean, I was there from the age of 3 to the age of 19, so that's like a life. That is a lifetime, really. And I think, I think what it did for me in the early years of my life, so from 3 to about, say, year 6, so about the time where you start to move on to your GCSE years and stuff. Second. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Alice. It did give, because we were all the same. We got kids there. We got a range of disabilities, and to my mind, like, we'd sit in like an RE exam. Somebody would be down on the floor having a seizure, and you'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's just Louise. She's having a fit. She's fine. She'll be all right." It wasn't like a big shock. So we were able to grow up, and I wasn't being self-conscious about the way I look, the way my cerebral palsy was affecting me or anything like that, because we were all the same. But I think when I got to senior school year and I started to realise, actually, exams are coming up. What exams am I going to do? How do you cross a road? How do you order from a catalogue? How do you iron a shirt? How do you clean a toilet? You think, this isn't for me, is it really? And I think, looking back now, what I would have probably done is, when I got to that senior school age, gone, can I go and do my exams somewhere else?
I mean, I think what we need when you become Prime Minister, Luce, is and you ban gravel. I think
stairs.
And stairs. Yeah. What we need to do is find that middle ground where there's classes of mixed physical and sort of cognitive ability children, where children are engaged with by a number of adults, taught everything from life skills to academic subjects, and supported to grow in the way that is right for them and is led by them and what they want, not by what society thinks. You know, the reason that you got taught that stuff at school is because they went, well, she's in a wheelchair, she obviously doesn't know how to cross the road, and that's something we need to teach her. And it's nonsense.
I think I had a bartering thing with the teacher and said, if I cross the road, can I go to the pub? And she was like, I don't know. And I was like, no, I'm telling you, that's what's going to happen. I'm going to cross that road and then I'm going to go to the pub. She was like, oh, yeah, all right then. You know.
Yeah.
I think education needs to be improved for everybody. And I'm a big believer in inclusive education, and I think that should be, but I think some people may need assistance within that structure.
Yeah.
But then most children do, all children do, and I think that's the problem. It's wrong that non-disabled children are in classes of 35. They should be in classes of 12 as well.
Absolutely,
they really should. Yeah.
And so it ends up damaging everybody across the board, and that's what's wrong with it.
And it's really sad, because it's the kids who come from economically stable, usually affluent white families who can afford to put in the extra support, the extra effort, who can pay for them to go to public schools and things like that. And those are the kids that are able to excel, which is why you then see the pyramid effect in wider society, because the people who have been given the opportunity to excel are the people who don't have the support needs, who have got the ability to pay for anything they're missing, whereas the people at the bottom of the pile, the disabled people, the people on council estates, the people of colour, the people who are first generation in this country, they don't have those luxuries.
Absolutely So
that's my
and then it affects what kind of and then it affects what kind of job you get, and so I ended up in I was unemployed for a few years, which I've never minded unemployment particularly, but then I got a job in the civil service at the lowest rank. I was a clerical assistant, and I worked for the army, which again was a unique experience, because I think I was 19, the lowest rank, but I worked on a barracks for the Royal Engineers, and it was during the time of the Falklands War as well. And being a liberal leftist, that didn't go down. Absolutely, but I was in charge of machine guns, sandbags, and
you just
tires.
sound like a badass. You're just constant.
You didn't funnel them away for the revolution, did you? We could do with some machine guns right now, I think.
It was a truly surreal experience. I stood there for 2 years, and I used to have supervision. So someone would, in the civil service, you meet a manager once a month and talk about the job, and they'd go, how you doing? And I'd just go, I'm doing it to the best of my ability. I said nothing else. And then they'd ask another question, and I'd go, I'm doing it to the best of my ability. I just couldn't care less. It was awful. So, but. And it was just bizarre being in charge of sandbags, machine guns, and tires.
I think what we're learning here, Paul, is that you did in fact sabotage the armed forces from the inside out, and that's the reason we have the current outcome of the Falklands War.
It was the bizarre thing was, because I remember, because I was young and arrogant, and I'd sort of say, oh, just give them back to Argentina, I don't care. And of course, some of the people wanted to drop fake atom bombs on them, and I remember this warrant officer standing on my desk threatening to kick me in the head.
God!
And I remember, and I looked up to him and I said, "We both know you can't do that." He hated even more, and so, but luckily, after a couple of years, I broke my leg. And I was in hospital for 4 months. And on full pay, which was quite nice.
That is the beauty of the civil service.
Absolutely. But I met my future wife there, and I said I hated it, and she said quit. So I quit, I got me 6 months full pay first, obviously, off sick. And then I quit. So I was unemployed again for another couple of years. So till I went to do education courses. So it was good to have someone who was supportive enough to say, if you don't like it, quit.
Yeah.
It's important.
I think everybody needs that one person in their life that goes, this is making you miserable, to recognize when you are miserable and to recognize what is making you miserable, to go, just because it doesn't matter how stubborn you are. Sometimes you just have to go, all right, you win. Bye.
And I think it's very hard. That's kind of an element of self-care that people find really difficult. Yeah. Like literally me and Lucy had a conversation this morning where she was like, I'm in quite a lot of pain today. And I went, well, let's not do our meeting after recording then. And she was like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, I don't care. I'd much rather you chilled out on the sofa and didn't hurt sitting in your chair than we discuss something that's not that important. Like, obviously the podcast is important and I care about it, but...
Yeah, 20 potential sponsors out there.
It's not gonna, it can wait 24 hours. And I think that a lot of people with disabilities find it difficult to kind of go, I'm not going to fight through this. And you do need that outside person to occasionally go, what are you doing? Why are you just like that warrant officer wasn't kicking you in the head? You're basically kicking yourself in the head. Why are you doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it was. They were a bizarre few years in the army for the civil service. It was just ridiculous. The other funny story from there is the major quite liked me for some obscure reason. Perhaps I reminded him of something. And I remember it snowed one year, and he ordered all of these sappers, squaddies, to carry me, around the barracks, and they hated touching me.
Oh,
but of course
they hated it.
Well, I was this sort of freaky thing, and but just the idea, because we were all very masculine, and an order was an order, so they had to carry me around the barracks, which just made it even funnier.
Now this is reflecting on your academic specialism, Paul. This is a film I'd watch. I would watch all of this. Be amazing.
I'm on the phone to Warner Brothers now. How much snow was there on the ground? Was it like a little bit where you could have gone, actually, I'm fine?
Oh God, yeah, it wasn't much because I used to walk. I did a bit on crutches as well in those days.
Yeah.
So I could just say it was damp and I'd want to be carried, maybe because it annoyed them so much. And again, being a liberal leftist that I am, working with the army, they were all waiting to get to Northern Ireland and shoot people and all that kind of stuff. Because that's what they've been trying to do. It wasn't like anything unusual, but it was like the antithesis of everything that I had been brought up to believe as a leftist liberal whinger. So it was not very good. But then when we quit, Claire quit her job as well because she was a nurse and she got a bit of a bad back. So we applied for jobs all over the country because we lived in a really posh bit of Surrey, although we was in a council flat with my dad. We ended up with a job in Wolverhampton running an old people's home, which again was, I think we were there for a couple of years, and this sounds awful, but I think it had 60 people. Half of them died in the 2 years we were there because this place had been left to rack and ruin for years. They'd not had a warden, which Claire was. We took it because there was accommodation with it. And most of the people in this place actually should have been in long-term care even. There were people with severe dementia who were sort of living independently. And Claire had to go around and collect the rent. And it was a way of getting out of the south because it was very expensive. And so going to 30 funerals in a couple of years, that did Claire's head in as much as mine. We used to go away for a weekend and it would be kind of like, who's going to be dead when we get back?
Do you know?
It was just awful. It was just
when surreal. I've touched on this very briefly in previous episodes of the podcast, but when I was at school, because of the nature of the fact that we were all disabled, it got to a stage where I think one year we must have lost about 7 or 8 people in one term. And it really, up until that point, I was like, yeah, it's fine, I've got a disability, do you know what I mean? And nothing really upset me very much about it, really, because it was just, I was very matter of fact about it. But since then, after that sort of term of, I've got to go to another funeral, you shouldn't, at that age of about 15, 16, have gone to more funerals than you have school reunions or school discos, really. That's how awful it became. And it did sort of change me as a person, because you thought, oh, okay, this is a bit scary. This wasn't in the script. Where, you know, nobody warned me about this. Because that's the thing. You don't, as disabled people, you don't sit around going, do you know when you're going to die? Because your condition got worse. You don't do that, do you, really?
Well, it's where I got my dread of death, actually. Particularly Wednesday nights in winter, I dread, because that's when people died at school, which was really bizarre. But then the advantage of that was that I learnt to wiggle my ears. So
wiggle your ears?
I did, yeah, because I remember there was someone who'd been ill and whatever, and I remember saying to the nurse, you know, what's happened to Susan? And of course the answer was, you'll find out in assembly tomorrow. And when you get a
fear, that, and I've got my stomach's gone because it's like trigger.
when you have that fear of dread, your face drops. And I noticed that every time if I could do that, my ears would wiggle. So I can wiggle my own ears because of the people that died at school.
I mean, that's one.
Not much of an advantage.
Yeah, I was going to say it's quite the memorial you've got there.
Is Paul coming to the funeral? I want him to wiggle his ears when I die.
But it was that moment where I felt what my face was doing of the kind of that utter dread of what you were being told.
It is that pit of your stomach sort of churn, isn't it? It's really hard to describe what it feels like. But I can remember you'd go into school in the morning after, you know, somebody had passed away, and it was just a horrible, horrible atmosphere. Yeah. Horrible atmosphere. And, you know, I don't think people appreciate when I sort of tell them what I went through. They're like, oh my, that is, because I mean, they went to a mainstream school, and the worst that happened was there was an outbreak of flu or a cold. I don't think people quite get their head around it, really.
And you had staff going, it's for the best, and you're thinking, no, it isn't.
No,
it bloody isn't. No. That's not for the death. Is not for the best for anybody.
No,
you know, especially my friends. So it was a surreal experience. So then we moved to Wolverhampton. I've lived in Wolverhampton for about knocking on 40 years, I suppose. 38 years. So, and Wolverhampton is very different to Surrey. I'm sure you'll have gathered. So, and again, it was the peak of unemployment. So the locals, when we lived in a place called Bilston, and the old people's home, and they weren't too keen on people from Surrey coming up to take their jobs, in quotes, despite the fact that this job had been empty for 5 years, nobody wanted it, and it was a nightmare. It was neither here nor there. So, but it was the best thing we ever did, because it got me into an access course. I did a computer course. I ended up going to university, or it was Polytechnic then, and I did a degree in English and history. I actually started in politics and economics, but economics was just so shit. It was just awful, and it's funny because most of the theories I remember have all been debunked now as well. And then I did an MA. Claire went to do a degree as well, so I was the first in my family ever to do a degree. Claire was the first one outside of her father ever to do a degree. And then I did an MA in American Lit at Keele, which was the best course I've ever done. And then I fell into doing a PhD, so in disability in cinema. But the MA was, the reason that was good is because there were only 2 of us doing it. And again, this is how education has changed. That will be dropped now, and it would never exist because they're not doing it. And you had to read between 3 and 5 novels a week. Things like Moby Dick, which is enormous. And so
3 and 5 a week.
I
couldn't do that, and I am voracious reader.
You had to do the work. And I think it was the only thing where you couldn't hide. No. And that's what made it so good. You know, it was, I remember I did French cinema on my first degree, and there was 80, 90 people in the class. Half of you hid at the back and you never needed to say a word. But when there's 2 of you, you had to have an opinion, you had to have done research, you had to have read the book. And it was by far the best thing I ever did.
It's a bit like going to a book club and not reading the book and just going, yeah, I agree with you. You know, it doesn't work, does it?
Yeah. And if there's only 2 of you in the book club, you look like
exactly. It's more of a, do you want to go down the pub for a pint, isn't it? Rather than let's talk about this book. So, Paul, you touched upon there about your degree in disability in cinema.
Yep.
Is that something that's always interested you? Is that, you know, what perked your interest?
How did you go
really?
from American lit to disability cinema? Because I can see the connection, but it's not a straight line. It's it's a parallel jump.
Absolutely. I'd always loved cinema, and I think when I did my first degree, people tend to do degrees that they think are going to help them get a job, rather than something they'll enjoy.
Oh, you see, I did it the other way around. I did a master's degree in film and disability, and it could not help me get any jobs. So I'm now like, damn it, I should have done social work.
Well, I qualified as a social worker in the middle of my PhD as well. So,
there you go.
I did that
Dark Superman.
No, I did that for the money, but that's another thing. So you used to get a really big grant in it. But I'd always grown up loving cinema. My father was a cinema projectionist after the Second World War. So I grew up with his love of cinema, and so, and I think when I wanted to go and do the PhD, I thought I'll go and do cinema, and of course, then the thing I'd started to get interested around that era, which is about 89, 90, was disability, and I thought, and there was nothing existed on it at that point apart from a couple of very short pamphlets. I think there was one by Colin Barnes. There wasn't much; it was occasional articles and whatever. And so it was a nice little opening. And of course, when you go to do a PhD, which I did at Warwick under the legendary Professor Richard Dyer, he was a really nice guy.
I didn't know you did it under Richard Dyer. That's impressive.
It was, and he was a truly great guy, and he was in the best supervisor you could have ever had. And it was about coming up with being original. And again, because I put that back to having gone to the special school, I could be original. I hadn't been taught how to think in a straight line. You could go off at all these different angles.
Yeah.
And so, and again, because his stuff was gay cinema, so there was a lot of parallels. And then there was, I did it at Warwick with a whole load of the kind of key people, Perkins, Vincendo and Dyer and all those kind of people. So it was in a truly great place. And so, I went in once every 4 or 5 weeks, met, and we'd discuss, what we'd seen for a couple of hours. The saddest thing was I remember I started to collect films on VHSs off the telly. I record them off the telly, and because people would say, what you're doing, there aren't many films about disability. But of course, one of the arguments I came up with is that actually, from my collection proved it. It's in almost every film ever made, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands. They're often minor characters, but quite pivotal, and you just don't notice them because they're so common. So that their invisibility is their visibility, and so I ended up with thousands and thousands of VHS videos of all these bloody movies. So it was.
I mean, when I did my MA, and we are talking 2009, 2010, because I'm old. And I mean, even then, the key text I was reading was is this Martin Norden?
Norden.
Yeah. And you. So it's really, I mean, I look at the people who are doing disability history and disability cinema and stuff now, and I think looking at Twitter and looking at the wealth of interest and learning that is out there now, even in the 10 years it's been since I got my MA, has really changed, because I think there was a lot of work done by people like you and your peers to kind of go, actually, this is everywhere, and it doesn't have to be a film where the whole thing is about disability, because actually that's one of the kind of the key things, is that there may be a minor character, but the way that disability is presented, and the fact that perhaps they're only a secondary character whose role, whose kind of purpose and function is to
support and make the lead character look,
or to kind of twist the narrative in a certain way,
sort of fluffing their ego, and
that says a lot.
Absolutely. So it was interesting, and again, I got a lot of stuff out of it, a lot of work and stuff, which travelled all over Europe doing film festivals. There used to be a German disability film festival called lABLEd, The Way We Live, which I was a jury member of in like 96 or something, and there was some fantastic stuff. So I used to go to Paris and all that kind of stuff, but academia wasn't for me, because I remember I wrote a book review once and I wasn't very nice because I didn't like the book, and I regretted it. I really regretted it, because it's kind of like, well, somebody's put their heart and soul into this, just because I don't like it, what's my right to criticise it? And everybody has a right to say whatever they want, and of course, and then the person who wrote it died not long after either. So and I thought, this isn't for me, because it's quite harsh. It's quite an aggressive,
very, combative, and every man for themselves. I said that we talked about this in other episodes. We had a autistic academic on, and I mean, I gave up on my PhD because it was too hard, because everybody was, when you've got disability and you need a little bit extra support, when you're surrounded by people who are putting themselves first, because that's the environment and the consciousness of that kind of environment, you don't get supported.
Absolutely. And I had no formal education from being at special schools, so you're always at the back, like grammar and spelling and all those kind of things.
Did you threaten to stab anybody? I feel like that might have helped.
No. I was usually the victim of stabbing, so
just use what you know, that's all.
No, I mean, both me and Alice have, I think we didn't have very good experiences at university, did we?
My bachelor's was good. I loved my bachelor's, but that's because I went out dancing with my friends all the time. Not because of what I was doing.
I was bullied quite severely by both the other students on the course and my lecturer, who was of the belief that, well, I don't know what you're doing here, kind of thing, because you're never going to amount to anything. And then I went to get my first job out of university was at the BBC, so it was a big two fingers up to them, really. And there was a bit of me that was like, do I just give up? Do I just give in and sort of jack this all in and forget about it? But I'm so glad I didn't. And it's just being that, that academic environment can get very poisonous, can't it? And it can push you to your limits if you're not careful.
Well, especially if it's combined with physical issues, like when I went to all of the places I went to, physical access was nominal, if at all, particularly the Polytechnic, to the extent that the Polytechnic is based in Wolverhampton, since I was there, has been completely demolished and rebuilt.
Really?
It was that inaccessible. And Keele, I went to Keele, that was pretty inaccessible. I went to Birmingham when I qualified as a social worker. That was pretty dreadful as well. Warwick was all right because I knew where to park and I knew where to go, and I just met my one supervisor, etc. And so I quite liked Warwick, and again, because I didn't have to go all the time, that was another good bonus. But I think it's the psychological. You could probably cope if you didn't have the physical, or you could cope with the physical if you didn't have the psychological. And so it tends to be a struggle, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, particularly as disabled people, in navigating that inaccessibility often of the people you're dealing with. And young people, they're better than they always ever been, but actually they're busy getting on with their own lives to give a shit about what you do, and rightly so, because actually it's the institution's responsibility to make those kind of changes. So but so since I finished the PhD, I was involved in setting up the West Midlands Disability Arts Forum. I was director of that for a few years. Outside Centre, we've put on art exhibitions by disabled people, because we work on a kind of disability art model, which we can talk about in a minute if you want. And so that's what I've been doing sort of most of the time since. Outside Centre's been going for like 22 years, I think, and so I've been involved in that, doing filmmaking. We promote shows, put on shows by people with learning difficulties. Everything, art exhibitions. We run a couple of film festivals in Wolverhampton at the Lighthouse, disability film festivals that were really good. We were the first to start to include archive film of disability, which others have now copied, but we were the first, actually. So we had a link with MACE, the Midlands Archive for Central England. So we got film from literally 1909 of people of short stature at football matches, right up to people driving invalid cars in the 50s, and documentaries that were on in the 50s and 60s about individuals, and so real archive footage, which was the thing I'm proudest about, is that we brought that to the forefront, actually, in Wolverhampton, in doing that. And again, it's fascinating to see archive footage, because it could be made today. There's films about people driving cars and the problems they're having that are just exactly the same then as they are now. And I think that was one of the best things we ever did. We did 2 disability film festivals, both with archive, and they were great things.
It sounds like a fantastic thing. And the Outside Centre, that's where I found your details, Paul, originally, to get in touch with you way back when. And I can remember, I came back from college in a flat. My mum was like, I found this website, and I was reading. I was like, this sounds amazing. I want to be part of that club. But I think I've said this before, that when I was at university, and I realised that actually, that even though I love the media and I love making films and things like that, that the reason why there was so much misunderstanding about disability was partly down to the fact that the way media portrays disabled people, that was quite heartbreaking for me. I was like, but I love this art form, and they're just being absolute bastards, really, towards the whole disability thing. You think that's not fair? That's not, and the amount of times opportunity is missed to show a realistic representation of disability, and it just breaks my heart every time that it's got to the stage now where you see a disabled person on the telly, and you're like, are they actually disabled, or is it somebody playing at it? It was quite, I was like, I came away from college and university feeling really disappointed that I wasn't represented. I didn't feel represented enough in this art form that I love to be part of, really.
And that's why I think a lot of disabled people like the most awful depictions of ourselves, because you're seeing yourself, which is not that common. It's common, but it's not that usual in the sense of it being realistic. But equally, I think the most awful representations are often the best, because you can think, so that's why they treat me like they treat me.
Yeah.
You can almost get reassurance from seeing a representation and thinking, they hate them. That explains why they don't like me, why they're marginalising me, why they're persecuting me, why they're discriminating against me. And I think that was that was a good thing to see and try to understand. But I loved going to the cinema, and doing the PhD was quite difficult, because you'd go to watch a film just for fun, and then a disabled person would turn up, and you think, oh shit, why couldn't they not have any in this film? I just want to watch a film with no disability in, because I'm going to be interpreting it, reading it, and all that kind of stuff. Just don't have any disabled people in this film, please. But then there always was, so it was fascinating.
What do you think is one of the best films that you've seen surrounding disability, Paul? Either in the mainstream or independent, or?
Well, I always say the best one is one that's political, intelligent, clever, and funny. And I will always go back to Young Frankenstein by Mel Brooks. Mm-hmm. Mel Brooks knows what he's doing as a Jewish creator, and he knows about discrimination, marginalization, stigma, identity. And I think in creating the Young Frankenstein, he plays with it. In a way, he plays with the genre stereotype. So there's a great scene in it with Gene Hackman, who's uncredited, which plays on all the scenes of cinema's treatment of people with visual impairment. And it is a truly great scene because it's playing with it. It's very funny. It's not laughing at, it's laughing at the audience, saying, this is what you expect. This is more like what it could be. The main hunchback's hunch keeps changing side, and things like that. And he knows, you can tell there's great intelligence behind it. And I think, and it's a comedy, it's funny, it makes you think. So I always bizarrely say Young Frankenstein. I think when you've done the film festivals, there's always short films that you come across. I remember there was one called Fred, which was at the German Disability. It was an American film that won an award. Fred, which was about a guy with spina bifida, so I really liked it. He walked on crutches, which was really good. But I think you've got to try and take out of films something positive, even if it is that explains why they think about us like that. Even the most awful ones, I think, can do that. I tend, the worst are obviously kind of what we call inspirational porn. They're the worst. And there's a growing number of them, because I do a film podcast with a couple of other disabled film buffs, academics indeed. One of them is the primary film academic, in my view, Alison Wilde, and Miro Griffiths, who's at the Disability Studies Unit. So we do a film podcast where we look at disability in cinema, and it's fascinating because we see lots of stuff that people wouldn't normally see. And you look on our website, www.digital-disability.com. Got to get the plug in.
We'll put the link in our description for the podcast.
Yeah. So we there's a new film out actually called Best Summer Ever. Have you heard of that one? You should. The cast is almost entirely disabled, and it tries to create a fantasy world of school and camps where disability is 100% not an issue. Right. We're going to do that one next. So you should listen to that, because there's problems with it. There's good things about it, but there's serious problems with it. But it's fascinating to see. I think you can watch it on Netflix or Amazon now, actually.
Okay.
Best Summer Ever. It's unique and interesting, and so I recommend checking that one out and listening to the podcast after.
Of course. It's always great to get other people's opinions. What films they like about disability and things. Because for me, I like a superhero film, and I was thinking about this the other day. I know that superhero films are 10 to a penny, and that people get sick of them because there's so many of them now. But I was thinking, I wonder why it is, and particularly the X-Men films. And I'm like, well, what? I was thinking the other day, well, why is it that I like those sorts of films? And I think it's because that, particularly the X-Men films. So these are a bunch of people that the society thinks there is something wrong with them. Mm-hmm. Something happens, they get taken in by some guy in a wheelchair, which that isn't the reason I like it. But this guy in a wheelchair takes them in, looks after them, enhances their skills, and then like the world ends, and then who do they call? Oh, they call the misfits, who everybody thinks there's something wrong with them, and what do? We save the world. I think that's what I kind of like about it.
I talked about the X-Men in my MA because I think a lot of people, particularly because it's the ones that were directed by Bryan Singer, is considered to be very it's gay cinema. Especially that, is it the third one where it's all about conversion and cures? But I think, there is a big thing to be looked at with those films, because actually a lot of those X-Men have got physical differences, some of which you can see, some of which you can't, that, cross across their lives. And I remember talking in my MA about the character of Rogue, who she's got, I can't remember her power. If she touches people, something happens. She steals their life force or something. And there's people screaming at me at the moment for not quite getting that right. But she,
I had nurses at school like that.
and there's an interesting discussion in that film about her decision to actually want to get a cure and get her power taken away from her, because for her it isolates her. It means that she can't have intimate relationships with people. And I think within the disability community,
I was just about to say the same thing.
There's a lot of that is very reflected, that there are some people who would choose to explore treatments and cures for their disabilities because it causes them pain or it makes them feel socially isolated. So it is, I think that those films, there's a lot of very interesting stuff to. I also can understand why it's been very kind of picked up and championed by the LGBTQ community.
Completely.
But I think also that's also more evidence of the fact that I think that there's a huge overlap in minority community identification. It's the exclusion element of it. So
absolutely.
That and the fact that Iron Man is just cool, and I want an Iron Man suit. To be fair,
you see, I want to marry Captain America.
He's the boring one. He's so boring.
I don't care. He's so handsome.
I was going to say, I don't think it's about his personality, is it?
He's really nice. He's got a very nice dog. So
that's enough. That's enough, isn't it, Alice? Really?
Oh, but a man and a dog.
The character of Captain America is a boring arsehole, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again.
I think we're going to have a falling out loose.
You're the sponsors there, aren't you, with that kind of language?
We're going to have a falling out loose.
I've got nothing against Chris Evans, though. Chris Evans is fine. It's just his character. But yeah, I think that is why, that is the reason why I particularly like a superhero film, because there is this element of, you think maybe it comes from having people constantly throughout my life thinking she's not good enough because she's in a wheelchair, and then when push comes to shove and you really need somebody to save the day, step forward the disabled, or the people that are different, because actually you don't know what you're doing, stand aside please. It's that kind of, it is that level of, you're going to need us one day.
Well, and they are, and they're going to regret when they get rid of all of us. But I think often the most mainstream of Hollywood cinema actually has quite radical ideas at the heart of them, and I think some of the superhero movies do that, about difference, identity, marginalization, what society, what community is about, including everybody supporting one another. And often you get that in some of the most mainstream movies, such as the X-Men movies, and that's fascinating, because people. But then the problem is people. I think it used to be called the intentional fallacy. Is that people don't read things like you've made them to mean, and so I think to me, the problem with superhero movies, although they do incredibly have the most radical stuff in it, they enable you also to ignore it, and that's one of the conflicts in looking at cinema and enjoying cinema.
That was always the thing that interested me about cinema, and when I studied it was the kind of difference between the things that the narrative and the character tells you and the things that perhaps the visual production, the way a shot is set up, the way, the different conflicting messages that you get from that. So you might have a character who has, progressive ideas about X, Y, and Z, but and maybe by the end of the film, they are seen to be, the narrative says this person is happy, they've got what they want. But then when you look at the construction of the film, throughout the film, they've been saying what makes people happy and what people want is relationships, and this person's ended up alone. Things like that. I think that those are the things that are the kind of insidious ways that those dangerous kind of ideas get really...
Absolutely. But I think equally it's people's minds give them the ability. One of the great creative joys of humanity is that it can interpret something in front of it that people can interpret in a way that no one else on earth can interpret it in that way. And they can do that with real conviction and validation of everything they think about it. And I think cinema is the great battle between culture and society, meaning and death and life, and that's what's great about cinema. I think that's why I love cinema. So because it's all there, that ability to be incredibly powerful, but equally so that someone else can see it as just rubbish. And it's that's what's amazing about cinema.
I mean, and I think as well, you've got the opportunity, haven't you? Everybody's got a film that's stuck with them. So if you do disability right in cinema, you would hope that that film sticks with somebody, a group of people, that then they can go, actually, I saw, before I saw that film, I thought X, Y, Z, and now I've seen that film, and it's made me realise that my belief was wrong. I mean, I'm not saying cinema can change the world, but it can definitely change it. It can inform and it can
change individual lives. I think a good example of that is Me, which is really bizarre because it wasn't a disability film. One of the most pivotal films was Chariots of Fire. I don't know if you've ever seen Chariots of Fire. It's about the runners.
Yeah.
I watched that, and that made me do certain things. I went out, I started walking, I started getting fit, I started getting healthy, which then meant I broke my leg. I then met my wife. I then started getting unhealthy and fat again. But actually, having watched Chariots of Fire, if I probably hadn't seen that, that was quite instrumental in changing my life.
Well, you wouldn't have met your wife, would you, if you think about it? If you go further down that line.
Absolutely. There was something else. When I broke my leg and I was in hospital for 4.5 months, which again was just bizarre because my brother had broke his leg a few years before, and the doctor who tried to pin it was drunk and managed to end up...
Oh, my God!
And he ended up losing his foot. My brother lost his foot because of that. And so when I went in with a broken leg, they were terrified to touch me. So I was on traction for 4.5 months. But I ended up in a bed next to someone else on a public ward who really did change my life. He was an American psychologist from Texas, and he basically gave me therapy about every aspect of my life, every day, all day for 6 weeks.
Wow!
I mean, I'll do it.
He's still one of my best friends. I still see him. He's like 85 now, and that luck. And I think often as a disabled person, your luck can change on a sixpence. If I hadn't have watched Chariots of Fire, if I hadn't have been broken my leg, if my brother hadn't have lost his leg, if I hadn't have then been in this bed next to this other guy who really did change my entire perspective and view of life, because he was such a professional and such a good guy and an inspiration, that and I think that's the thing I take away from being a disabled person. where your life goes can change on a sixpence, and it's about trying to be open to that moment, that sixpence, that you can flip it on and make it better for you. And I think that's to me is the key, because one of the things he taught me is that you're absolutely right. It should be better out there, but it isn't.
No.
And so it's about what I do.
You've got to make the best of it. And
you've got to try and have the life, live the life, think the life that you want. That doesn't stop any of that not being wrong, because it is wrong, it is evil, and that's what we should strive for. But actually, at particular moments, that's not going to change. It is about me. But equally, I don't want to make it about the individuals, because I'm a big believer in politics, and so that we've got to fight for that all the time. But it hasn't changed. It isn't going to change in the short term.
And I think it's important for people's kind of self-esteem and self-worth to not get. It can be really disheartening to go, I've been fighting and fighting and fighting, and nothing has changed in the big, huge 7 billion people in the world sense. But actually, on a one-to-one sense, it might have. And that's really important to recognise.
I mean, that's the thing. If you can do the best you can in your little corner of the world, and make the best of. My mum has got a phrase that she says all the time: "You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." That's what she says, and she's right. I always say my life didn't turn out how any of us in my family would have planned, but it doesn't mean to say that I've got a terrible life. In fact, I quite like my life, thank you very much. And I only have to look back to the time where I first met you, Paul, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was going through periods of time at college and university where I'd got outside sources saying, you're not going to be very good at this because you're not the same as everybody else. You're not going to be very good. And you look at now and what I've managed to achieve since I've known you, Paul. I struggle some days, and I think this is really hard going. I'm really struggling, but then I look back a few years later and I think, blimey, what I have managed to achieve. And I think it does people good, doesn't it, to just take a step back and reflect as to what we've managed to. I mean, with this podcast, me and Alice, we never in a million years imagined that this podcast would be so popular. Really, I think we just thought we'd be wanging on about disability, and
sorry, just had to knock on wood there.
We would be wanging on about disability and people would get bored, but it touch wood. I'm touching wood now as well. I don't. I think it's taken us both by surprise, hasn't it, really?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's an appetite. There's an appetite for it because there still isn't that much by, for, and about us. And I think that's the key. And equally, it is about being supportive because, again, the individual is important, but actually the more important thing is supporting one another. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, I'm a great believer that you should do that blindly. Again, coming back to academia, there are factions within disability studies, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And, these people are traitors and these people are saviours, all that kind of thing. And again, it doesn't stop it being true. But actually, I'm a great believer. Everybody has their own path, and you've got to support them on their path till they get where they're going to go on that path. And that's the most important thing. I
think it's just, you're completely right there, Paul. As ever. Paul, is there anything else you want to touch on, Alice, before we...
I don't think so.
No? I think that's been really great episodes to listen to. Paul, where can people find you online with things? I know you've mentioned your podcast. Do you want to give another plug?
It's all on www.digital-disability.com. Everything's on there. I think my PhD's on there. The podcasts are on there. All the other audio stuff. Some of the art. Everything is on there. So just go to that one. digital-disability.com. It's all on there.
Fabulous. We'll put a link in our episode descriptions for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul, today. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you again, and I hope that we won't leave it as long. Well, I won't leave it as long next time.
I've enjoyed it, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for listening to the lABLEd podcast. If you like the show, please rate, review and subscribe. You can follow us on social media at lABLEd podcast.
Thanks go to our editor Adam Hall, our music composer Maisie Crunden, and our graphic designer Sarah Coley.
We'll see you next time.